Beat the Bookie podcast, episode 6. I am at Alan Seslowski here with the star of the show, Statsational, Mr. John Alesia. How are you, my friend?
Doing well. It's Friday morning, so
Friday morning,
busy. Yeah.
Christmas week. Those watching the video could see we have our beautiful Christmas setup there with all our sports toys on the bottom and our beautiful hanging lights on top. And those of you listening on the audio cast, just close your eyes and imagine it. I'm here with John Alesia of Beat the Bookie, DFS Army's newest sports wagering coaching advice site, and it is growing by leaps and bounds. And we are going to continue making these podcasts in hopes that we can give out some good free information to people. We don't give out picks; we give out things that are evergreen, that'll last forever. And today, John and I are going to talk about false narratives, and we're going to try to debunk them when it comes to sports wagering.
Hopefully we do. There's a few of them. I think this all started with a couple of things that were said in some of the other podcasts that we did, and it's just there's a bunch that we could do a million of these if we had the time. But I think the message, hopefully, that I get out there is just because you hear something on ESPN or Fox Sports or during the broadcast doesn't necessarily make it true unless they back it up with some sort of statistics. But you'll know this because when they just sort of blurt out these cliches, it makes me want to run to the computer and see if I can find some evidence to counter that. And the nice thing about it is a lot of times we can take advantage of the fact that people often think what they're hearing is true. And we'll see maybe a couple instances of that.
Yeah, and what we're gonna do today is we're gonna go through about hopefully 3 or 4 common narratives that you hear all the time in sports wagering, and and John's gonna do his best to either confirm them or debunk them. And like John said, that people fall for these narratives all the time, self included. You included too, listening. I'm sure you've heard some of these, and this could give you a real edge in sports wagering. But as you can see, today also we're going to be promoting Beat the Bookie, which is a new service. You just go to dfsarmy.com and click in the upper right-hand corner, click on the Beat the Bookie tab. And today, a special holiday gift from us to you. Use code BTB, that's Beat the Bookie, and you get 20% off for life. And inside our service, what you could do is you can get personal interaction with our coaches. Yes, they do give out picks, but they also, the main purpose of our site is that we give you the tools and models and show you how we get there and hopefully make you a better sports wagerer. So even if you are a beginning bettor, if you are an experienced level one, we have this service for you. And John is currently developing a course. It's going to be unbelievable. And if you're a DFS Army member, what are you waiting for? Come on over, see what all the fun is about. And if you're listening on the public feed, come join us. We'd love to have you. All right, John, let's get into this. Debunking false narratives. The one where I've always heard is that when teams go over to play in Denver, play the Broncos in football, that Mile High Stadium, it's got thin air. It's a hard home field advantage to overcome. Talk to me about this narrative.
This is actually, I think, what prompted this whole discussion in the first place. You had mentioned it during one of our Vegas Line, Geeks Vegas Line podcasts, and I hear it all the time in sports talk radio. And whenever anyone makes a pick, you have to understand most people make picks based on just like you probably make your picks at home when you're doing a pool or when you're betting. You just kind of look at the game and you say, oh, I like this side. And then you come up with reasons as to why you like it. And often when these are easy ways to come up with an excuse, because you hear it so often how tough it is to play in Denver. And it is, the area is thinner. But what's happened is if you look at the numbers, all right, over the last, I believe, 15 plus seasons against the spread, all right, the visitors are 72, 55, and 7.
Say those numbers again. Say those
72,
numbers.
55, and 7, the visitors in Denver. Now, it gets a little bit better. So that's like 57%. If you did nothing for the last 15 years, then just play that, you'd be plus money over the course of the season. If you just played against the Denver narrative.
So just that alone. Okay. So let me just slowly make sure I understand. So not only is that narrative false based on those numbers that you pulled, it's in fact the opposite is true.
And this is what I'm saying. Oftentimes you'll hear something so often that it's become so it's been so ingrained in the sport fan and the sports bettor that without them actually doing any research, they're in fact moving the line in the favor of that myth. So what happens is the other side of that actually becomes value. We don't realize just how narrow a move the value is. I've talked about this before when we talk about line moves and we're looking at line movements. If you know nothing other than you have the ability to read line movements in the NFL, and it just really works in all cases, but we're so entrenched here in the NFL, and that's my main sport. If you could beat the final line by a point, you become a player who makes money. Not a lot, but you change the odds from the house guaranteed, that house EV getting EV and you're being a negative EV player, to if you can get a 1 point better, you become a positive EV player. So in this instance, when you have some of these myths, and unfortunately it doesn't work with all of them, but in this one, it's a really good one. You could actually be on the other side of that and make some money. Now, if you take when they had Peyton Manning, right? Obviously they were a lot better.
You're talking about
team. I'm talking about Denver.
Broncos,
so they were a Super Bowl team. If you take the Peyton Manning years out, and as we know in the NFL, I've talked about this many times, there's certain quarterbacks who exceed expectations. So if you went under the model, if you had just your anti-Denver or your pro bet against Denver at home model because you saw this coming and you said, you know what, with Peyton Manning there, I'm gonna disregard it. It actually goes up to 61%. Like if you take the Peyton Manning years out, the visitors in Mile High have covered 61% of the time over the last 15 years.
Wow.
It's remarkable.
That is unbelievable. So again, we've all heard that the thin air. So why do you think that a rumor or a narrative like that develops? Is it just like it's a fun thing?
Well,
or is
for one, it's easy and there's truth to it. It is difficult. I've never gone to Denver, so I've never been up there, so I don't know. But I hear the stories where as soon as you get off the plane, you can feel it. You can feel how much more difficult it is to breathe. And of course, if you live there, you're more accustomed to it. And you'll see athletes train like I've seen boxers and MMA guys who want to train at high altitude because they feel it helps their cardiovascular training. That is scientifically proven. But then when it gets out into the market and the market over bets it,
okay.
This goes back to what I was saying where if you could just get these little 1 point advantages over the closing line. Well, in this instance, if the closing line is consistently going to be wrong because the market is moving in a direction, they're overcompensating for that, for what they keep hearing. I think that leads to the fact I had a game earlier this year. I forget which game it was, where I took the road team in Denver, and someone automatically said, I don't know if I like that game or not. It's tough to play in Denver. And I said, well, have a look at this. Like, it's not like we're generally getting more points than we should in Denver. So it's
the market
blindly taking those games has actually been worked well.
What I think, though, is that people forget that the spread already accounts for this calculation. That's what I was explaining to somebody this morning, is that, well, they said, well, isn't the standard home field 3 points? I said, of course it is. But then they'll add a quarter point here. They'll add a quarter point there, and the spread will get to 4.5 when they bake in not just, market perceptions. Is that a better way to say it?
Yeah. So I wanted to get into that a little bit as well, because, the common everyday sports fan bettor thinks like they possibly know some information that nobody else knows. Like, we don't know that Seattle's a hard place to play, or we don't know that Denver's a hard place, or Kansas City's noisy. Like, you were the only one who thought that. When you have information, if you have some sort of a model and you've got information that maybe, hey, the market doesn't know, like this, there's some really hidden stuff where you're looking at offensive holding penalties that is not necessarily something like the entire public. Well, that's different.
That's
like maybe now you're onto that. You're onto something. But if you think that it's not baked in, that certain stadiums have a home, or certain teams have certain home field advantage because of their stadium or whatever the case may be, it's baked in. It's been baked in. Like, we know which are the tougher stadiums to play in, and that's baked into the line. And by the way, you were mentioning the 3 points. That 3 points is non-existent anymore. We were talking before this one that I could go quickly and look at my numbers, but there's a very small differential now in home teams. In fact, home teams were losing more often than the away teams earlier this year. They've now caught up, and they maybe are like plus between 5 and 10 games over 500 now, the home teams. And I think we were going to talk a little bit about that.
Yep.
But I wanted to talk about home field advantage a little bit.
Before, though, so we're going to agree that Mile High Stadium is tougher than most fields to play on is false. We're going to debunk that. It is, the big debunk across the screen. That is not true. We are not going to no longer perpetrate this terrible. In fact, we're going to tell people when we hear them say that, hey, I listened to Statsational on Beat the Bookie podcast, and he said that not only is it untrue, the opposite. But over the last, what'd you say, 15 years you pulled the number?
Yeah.
Is the actual truth. And we are not going to be suckers. We are not going to be fish and bet that narrative anymore. All right. Before we move on to our next one, just want to remind everybody that you can sign up for Beat the Bookie by going to the DFS Army website, click on the upper right-hand corner, the Beat the Bookie tab, and you could use code BTB. That's Beat the Bookie for 20% off for life. And we are currently building our own proprietary site to house all this information. So get somebody a Christmas present. Buy yourself a Christmas present. All right. Do you want me to move on to the next one on our list, or do you want?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about home field advantage.
Okay.
And you were asking me earlier about home field advantage and why there's home field advantage, or why there is a lack of home field advantage. Let's say this year. I spoke about this on another podcast. There's a book I highly recommend called Scorecasting. I'm going to forget now the author's names. It was the same guys who did the Freakonomics book, but they talk about a lot of interesting statistics based on sports. And in there, they talk about exactly why there is a home field advantage in sports. And
is it Wortham and Moskowitz?
It's Moskowitz, yes. And I forget
Wortham.
Was it
John Wortham or Wortham?
I believe that name's not familiar. Definitely the Moskowitz.
Okay.
One.
All right. Well,
both Scorecasting.
Yep.
And definitely worth having a look.
Yeah, it says right here. I just looked it up quick. It says Tobias Moskowitz. And
yes, that's it. Yeah.
And John Wortham.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Okay.
So in there, they talk about home field advantage, and I've seen this discussion on Twitter recently. Why is there home field advantage? Why is the home field advantage coming down? They were able to narrow down home field advantage to referees and umpires. And therein lies in their lies. My English being a first language is still not very good. But the in there you can find why home field or home court advantages exist. And what they found was basketball universally at the time, I believe they were looking at like a 57% home teams were winning at home at about a 57% clip, whether they were in Israel, China, the NBA, Europe. It didn't matter which league it was about the same. And that was one that you could really compare apples to apples because most of the sports were similar. Now in soccer, the difficulty in soccer is some home fields or some leagues around the world are a little bit more dangerous than others.
Meaning like from the fans and bottle throwing.
Talking about fans, you've got some of these Latin American or some of these European home, I guess they call them home pitches in soccer. So the home pitch there is extremely dangerous. And in those areas, they have a higher home pitch advantage than they do in, say, the World Cup. Or the World Cup, very rarely one team is always going to be at home, but their home advantage is not nearly as good, or Champions League or something of that sort, or the MLS here in the States. So the more dangerous countries and the more dangerous places that they play, the home pitch advantage goes higher. And what they've done is, like I said, they narrowed it down to referees, umpires. The closer you are to the field, the fans, the greater the home court advantage becomes. So the closer that the let's say the referee,
the proximity,
can hear the fans,
right,
and feel the fans. Yes. So when we talk about baseball, has historically had a very low home field advantage because, one, the fans are just not as rowdy in baseball, and two, they're very separated from the actual field of play. So it's the one sport, probably more than any, that has an actual competitive advantage in being the home, because you get to bat last. You've got a strategic advantage in being a home team, yet your actual advantage over the history of baseball is much less than it was in the NBA, where the NBA has absolutely zero strategic advantage to being a home team. They looked at shooting statistics and all that sort of thing. Everything is balanced, equal, home and away, yet the home team has an advantage. Now, what no one is talking about is replay affecting home advantages. Replay is changing the home court and the home field advantage in every single sport. We are seeing a decline in the home field advantages in every major sport here in the US, and that is strictly based on replay. You're seeing it in soccer as well, because they're adding replay into their penalties. Soccer, where one penalty just basically decides the entire game. Now that in these major leagues where they can go to a replay, that changes things. So it takes the referee off the hook, and now some sort of central figure can make that call away from the fans' scrutiny. They did one interesting study where there was, I believe in Germany, in one of the German leagues, they had to remove all the fans. There was riots or whatever it was, and they banned their fans for X amount of games. And in those games, they had no more. There was no more home advantage in games where the fans have been banned. It's happened all over the world with rowdy fans in soccer.
As somebody who, I referee high school basketball, and I can attest to this, that there's, especially in games with filled gyms, and there's people yelling right at you. And it's as much as you try to zero it out, you do hear them and you do feel that pressure. And it's, and that's at a low stakes, high school game. I mean, imagine what it's like at the professional level when there's thousands of fans and millions of people watching on TV. So I can totally have firsthand experience based on what you're saying here.
I thought about this 5 minutes before we went on here today. The UFC and boxing judges, no one's ever done a study on this. I'm curious as to, because I believe in boxing they all sit separate around the ring.
Yeah, and the same thing for MMA. There's one on each side of the octagon. There's three judges.
I'm curious as to, when we see these disparities in scoring sometimes, if there's any correlation to where they're sitting and the proximity to maybe the other one fighter's camp or the other, does that change how they view the fight? That would be an interesting study, and something that my hypothesis would be it does, but I wouldn't have the ability to do that study. It would be interesting if someone did, and maybe it's not as nefarious as we think sometimes with some of the scoring. Maybe it's just a product of the fact that they're sitting so close to one camp, and every time that camp does something well, it changes their psyche on to how the fight is going.
Cool. So pulling it back here, home field advantage. I think you're concluding at this point that it's not the all the traditional things, the travel, the body clock. It's more as the proximity. Does the calling have influence? Does the holding or the foul call have an advantage based on the fans being close to the referees? And I think that makes intuitive sense. And even in the nefarious, is Tim Donaghy's The Rogue Referees book, he talks about that a little bit, and how calls in home court and that referees make the bigger difference in the point spread rather than the actual players or the situation. So we're not going to debunk that. We're going to say that one's true. We're going to move on a little bit here. We want to hit at least two more of these minimum, and then people can come over to Beat the Bookie. And John talks about this stuff in Slack all day with the subscribers. You have access to him. So certainly sign up at dfsarmy.com/beat-the-bookie, or just go to DFS Army's website, click on the upper right-hand corner on the Beat the Bookie tab, and you could sign up with code BTB, get 20% off for life, and get a subscription to Beat the Bookie. The next one, John, is, I hear this all the time. For those of us who love the Survivor game, we love Football Survivor. I've always heard, don't take road teams. It is, it doesn't matter if they're the event. Why take a road team? Take a home team that's less likely to win by the spread. Talk to me about if this is something I should pay attention to, because I've won a Survivor pool and I haven't had any luck since I won that one about 8 years ago.
Well, for one, Survivor pools are extremely difficult to win, especially obviously if you're in one with a lot of people, 100 or more people. They become, even if you're one entry of 50, that might be your lifetime.
It's hard to win your fantasy football league when you're one of 12.
Exactly. So, yeah, we don't necessarily look at it like just survivors in general. People are like, well, I should win this. I know a lot more about sport. No matter how good you are, even if you're one of 100 and you have 1%, even if you upped your advantage to 2% just because you're a little sharper than everybody else, you're not going to be that much sharper than a 2% advantage, 2.5% advantage. You still may never win that pool if that's the only pool you enter in your lifetime. So, you do that every single year. It's going to be very difficult to win. But when we
how about the don't take road teams? I mean,
when we talk specifically about that, but not taking road teams, the reason why it sort of works, well, I'm going to take home teams is because we know home teams tend to be the favorite in most games. But if you are facing two teams of an equal spread, one is at home, one is on the road, there's no advantage or disadvantage to taking one or the other. As a matter of fact, when you're talking strictly survivor pools, a lot of times and often you do have an advantage in taking the road team just for the fact that everyone else might be taking the home team. Right. So without getting into game theory and all that, having two equal, the probability of both happening being equal and everyone takes one and not the other, you want to be on the other side. This is something that, we talk about in DFS and things like that, where we get more into the game theory. But the point on this pod is, don't be afraid. If you just look at 3-point, like games that are between 2.5 and 3 points as a favorite, we see very, very little. It's about 58% of the time, between 57 and 57.5, 58.5% of the time, the home team's going to win or the road team's going to win. It's a very slight differential, and it's not statistically significant as to when the road teams win and when the home teams win. So what's more important and what I want you to focus on is the line and not the actual who's home and who's away, because as we spoke about before, when we were talking about specific home advantages, the line bakes all that information in. People act as if, Vegas didn't realize that so-and-so was at home this week or on the road. No, they know. They're saying they're 7 points better. If there was some truth to the fact that, well, 7-point road teams are just not as good, they're not going to win as often as 7-point home teams, they just wouldn't, that line would change. They wouldn't be a 7-point favorite as much. Naturally, you're not going to see 7-point road favorites all that often, but guess what? They tend to be really good teams to be favored by that much on the road, or they're playing really bad teams. So when we're looking at that, I hear it all the time. Are you afraid to take that team because they're on the road? I used to be that guy. Hey, I'm never going to take a road team until I have to.
I mean, but now, other exceptions, like you're not going to take someone in New England, but then again, likely they're not going to be a
7-point favorite.
Right. They're not going to be a favorite anyway. Right?
If for some reason New England's a 7-point underdog, then I have no problem. Right. If that's the biggest favorite on the board, I need to take that team more often than not. And I'm not going to get into the game theory, but yes. So basically what I'm saying is use the lines, and this goes for all pools, by the way. That's something I actually jotted down. When you go into any sort of office pool, golf pools are really popular now, your March Madness pool. And this is one I was going to write down, by the way, about March Madness. I'm going to go into this, another one of these myths. You hear these things about, the 12 seed beats the 5 seed. You need to have the 12 against the 5 over a 5 because it happens every year. Well, it has nothing to do with the seeds, right? The seed, the teams don't know what seed they are.
I always take a 12 over 5. I'm the sucker.
Yeah, but you know why? And it's not that you're a sucker. It does happen. They are correct with the statistics. But so often in those games, the 12 seed is a 1-point underdog.
Right.
It's a 2-point underdog. More what's happening at, when you see on ESPN, they don't look at point spreads. They're looking at seeds. You'll see the announcers will go crazy when a 13 seed beats a 14. I've seen a 4-point underdog 13 seed beat a 4 seed in the first round, and they go crazy. Big upsets. It's the front of Sports Center. It's the headline story. Big upset today. It was a 4-point spreads in basketball.
It's like an 80 it's a 4-point spread is basically like a 58-42 game.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's going to happen. You're going to have a few, and you're playing enough games during the tournament that's going to happen. You're going to have these upsets. But anyway, yes. So I want to want everyone listening to this to really focus on the Vegas line, especially when you're doing any pool. Your main focus is, what's the line say? The line is incorporating all the information you need. Okay. And then you need to make game theory decisions based off of that line. But
right.
don't start throwing these cliches out there, or don't get worried about ranked teams. I had one of these, and I didn't bring it up. Was like ranked teams in all college sports.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure. So Survivor Pool, don't take road teams, debunked.
That is definitely debunked.
Debunked. Okay, for all the reasons you'd stated. All right. We're going to move on to the final one, and then we'll do a second part series of this one since people seem to be liking this. I could already tell. The comments are coming in fast and furious. All right. The next one that I have, John, and you hear this one all the time. I mean, you hear it when you're in high school. Defense wins championships. Defense wins championships. This has to be true.
Yeah, defenses win championships for sure, but so do offenses. It's actually what you want is a balanced team, and this goes for all sports. It's been proven in the NBA. It's been proven in the NFL. When I do my March Madness analysis, balance is better than being lopsided. So really strong defense with a very weak offense is not nearly as good as having a solid offense and solid defense. That was Virginia's problem for a long time, but Virginia last year, their offense was much better from an efficiency standpoint than they had been in the past, which is what led them to a national, that and a little bit of luck. But we look at it in all sports. The NFL, there's such a small sample size again in Super Bowl winners, but if we take the playoffs on the whole, you have teams. If you just look at the number one offense against the number one defense and their success rate during the playoffs, it's virtually identical. I believe the average rank of a Super Bowl winner in offense is somewhere in that 7.5 to 8 range, eighth in the league.
I mean, they're ranked in the top 10.
Yeah, and it's actually identical on the defensive side. They're somewhere between 7.5 and 8 ranked overall. The average Super Bowl winner on defense. So this is one of those that I think. And I think as you get older, you enjoy it more because as we get older, like our game was better, like our NFL was better. This one you hear in the NBA, NBA all the time. Defense was great in the NBA back in the 80s and the 90s, and now nobody plays defense, which is true. The games are much higher.
They stopped letting them hold the players. That's why.
Yes. And I get it. And you could, but as we all think our era was the best era for all sports, we always go back to our, they say, the music you listen to between the ages of like 16 and 23 is the music you're always going to listen to for the rest of your life. And that's the music you're going to love. I would imagine that works, in sports, like what the teams that you were into back in those formative years are the teams that you're always going to be into. And that's the era that you're going to be into. And if you're a Michael Jordan guy and not a LeBron guy, you're probably older and the LeBron guys are going to be young. I mean, it's just the way it works in sports. But anyway, when we talk about defense wins championships, I think that's a product of the fact that as everyone gets older, they look back and they think, boy, the defense is dominated. But I look back at all these years, including the 70s, when you look at the NFL, and yeah, there were some dominant defenses. Take the Steelers, for instance.
The Iron Curtain.
The Steel Curtain.
Steel Curtain. Sorry, what the heck? Yeah, Steel Curtain. And then, think about there's a whole bunch of those. There's the Purple People Eaters in the 70s. And then, there was the Orange Crush for the Denver.
But what people forget with the Steelers, they also had the number one rated offense. Right. So they, in I believe in 1979, they were number one on both.
That's right? The Terry Bradshaw, Lynn
Swan, Franco Harris.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore, by the way, in the NFL. Whatever the year was, 95-ish, when you started getting the salary caps and free agency changed things. Those Dallas teams were the last teams, the Dallas, San Francisco teams, where the core group of guys really stuck together. You just don't see it anymore. I mean,
let's not forget the Bills were one of those dominant teams, just because
Bills as well. Yeah, absolutely. But it's the same players. You don't have, like, outside of Brady, this Patriot run has been done with just a million different players. So you have to look at the history, and we think, yes, defense was more important. Defense was important in the NBA. but when you actually look at it, you need a good balance. To be strictly offensive or strictly defensive generally doesn't work in all sports. You want to have that balance unless it's just such a dominant one side of the ball. You're seeing it in the NBA now where you've got teams that strictly play offense, don't play any defense. You need that guy. Even Golden State, as great as they were shooting, you still have the Draymond Green there to do some of the dirty work. You need that type of thing. You need a little bit of balance. You need the guy who's going to rebound. You need the dirty work guy. Most of the great teams have had a combination of the two.
Yeah, even the 85 Bears, who is the gold standard for defense, still had a very functional offense with Willie Gault and Jim McMahon was, you
had one of the greatest running backs of all time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Even if he was past his peak at that point, but he was still, a top 3, top 5,
absolutely.
Top 6 running back. So absolutely. All right. So defense wins championships, debunked mostly because it's usually balanced with a plus offense where we agree on that one. All right. We are going to hold it right there. All right. We debunked 3 common narratives, and we are going to come back and do this again, hopefully this week, and we'll do a part 2. But what we want you to do is check out, if you like this content, go over to DFS Army, click on the upper right-hand corner on the Beat the Bookie tab, and check out a membership. Use code BTB for 20% off. And John, tell them quickly what we do over there at Beat the Bookie, why it might be a wise investment.
Well, firstly, we've got 3 coaches there, including myself. You got Ryan and Anthony with me, and we are basically guiding you through, helping you with any questions you may have as far as sports betting, how to do it, and more importantly, how to do it smartly. We've also got these models that are working tremendously right now. Anthony has models for the NHL. He's got his NBA model. Ryan, by the way, if you're watching this today, the college bowl season is about to start.
Today is the 20th of December of 2019.
Yeah, Ryan's on fire in college football this year, his model. So if you join up there today, you'll be able to start catching the bowl season action and continue just killing it with the college bowls. I've been doing the NFL primarily.
Your college I know you don't want to brag a little bit, because we don't just say, hey, our picks are great. But John, your model has it almost feels like it's broken the right way because it is college basketball. You're 10-3. Was it 10-3?
10-3 on the season. I don't do a lot of games. Yeah, so I don't pick a lot of games. So here we are in December. I pick my spots. It's 10-3. But let me tell you something about me personally. So even if you're someone out there and you're really successful, and I've been pretty successful with betting on sports, I've now improved my picking ability by being a part of Beat the Bookie, because now I'm utilizing what Ryan and Anthony do, and I'm filtering out my games even more, because now I'm looking at their stuff and saying, all right, if there's some sort of a disagreement here in my numbers and their numbers are pretty solid, I may want to stay away from that game. So just even if you're a plus EV player, an advantage player, having access to other advantage players only increases your ability to be profitable. So I've used those guys' models to my advantage, and it's helped my picks get even better. So I think whether you are a novice or a real experienced bettor, you're going to want to check it out. And for the price, it's crazy. You're not going to get a better deal anywhere.
Yeah. So, okay. If you want to check it out, www.dfsarmy.com. Okay. You see if you're watching on the screen, you see we have it on there on the upper part of the screen, dfsarmy.com/beat-the-bookie. We're in the process of building out a proper site, but right now we house all the content there. You can come into our Slack chat, have personal access to our coaches, and more content like this. We do make picks, but again, we don't have a crystal ball. Our picks speak for themselves over the long. We keep our records posted. Anyone can check our records at any time as to what we picked. And right now, the guys are doing really well. It's a great time to come on over if you're a brand new sports bettor or you're just interested in checking out. Some guys on the site, they bet $5 a game. Some guys are more than that, but there's testimonial after testimonial of them building their bankrolls and just staying with it and having a better process. So I encourage everyone to join us over there at Beat the Bookie. And John, I am Alan Cislowski for my friend John Alesia, aka Statsational. We'll be back again in the next few days, a week or so, maybe post-Christmas with another Beat the Bookie podcast. But for now, we'll see you then.